Two crashes, 8 decades apart. Different eras, same story, greed, fear, and collapse. But what if these weren't just accidents, but patterns baked into the DNA of capitalism itself? What actually caused these crashes? And why did America survive both? Let's go back to the 1920s. America is buzzing. The Great War is over. Soldiers are home. And for the first time in history, ordinary people feel rich. This isn't just prosperity, it's intoxication. The stock market isn't some distant Wall Street thing anymore. It's personal. Your barber is trading stocks. Your teacher, your neighbor who drives a taxi. Between 1923 and 1929, the stock market tripled in value. Everyone had a tip. Everyone had a system. You'd walk into a barber shop and hear grown men debating whether to buy more General Electric or RCA, Radio Corporation of America, the Tesla of its time. And here's the kicker. You didn't even need money to get rich. You could buy stocks on margin. That meant putting down just 10% of the stock's value and borrowing the rest. So if you had $100, you could control $1,000 worth of stock. It was leveraged gambling, and everyone was doing it. Banks were handing out loans like candy. Brokers didn't ask questions. The philosophy was simple. The market always goes up, so debt doesn't matter. But beneath the glitter, cracks were forming. Farmers were struggling. Crop prices had collapsed after the war. Wages weren't keeping up with stock prices. Every day, people were drowning in debt. And nobody wanted to talk about it because talking about problems might pop the bubble. Now let's fast forward to the early 2000s. Different music, different fashion, same fever. America is riding high again. The dot-com bubble just burst, but the economy recovered fast. And now there's a new gold rush, real estate. Everyone's talking about houses, not just buying a home, buying homes, plural. Flipping them, renting them, watching their value double in 3 years. Your cousin who barely graduated high school just made $200,000 flipping a condo in Miami. And just like the 1920s, you didn't need money to get in on the action. Banks were offering something called subprime mortgages, loans to people with bad credit, no savings, sometimes no job, no income verification, no problem. We'll call it Nino loan. No income, no assets. You could get a $500,000 mortgage with no money down and no proof you could pay it back. Some loans even had negative amortization, meaning your debt grew every month, even if you made payments. Why would banks do this? Because they weren't holding onto these loans. They were slicing them up, repackaging them, and selling them to investors as something called mortgage-backed securities. And here's where it gets wild. These packages of risky loans were being stamped with AAA ratings, the same rating as U.S. Treasury bonds. The safest investment grade possible. Wall Street wasn't just selling mortgages anymore. They were betting on mortgages. They created something called credit default swaps, essentially insurance policies on whether these mortgage bundles would fail. Except it wasn't real insurance. It was unregulated. A single firm could bet billions without having the money to back it up. The financial system had become a house of cards built on sand. And just like in 1929, nobody wanted to be the person who pointed it out. Because when everyone's getting rich, warning about disaster makes you the villain. October 24th, 1929. Black Thursday. It started quietly. A few stocks dipped. Nothing unusual. But then the dip became a slide, and the slide became a panic. Archival footage, crowds gathering outside the stock exchange, men looking worried. By noon, everyone was trying to sell, but there were no buyers. Stock prices were in free fall. Panic swept through Wall Street like wildfire. At 1:30 p.m., a group of powerful bankers met in an emergency session. They pooled their money, millions of dollars, and started buying stocks, trying to stop the bleeding. For a few hours, it worked. The market stabilized. People exhaled. The following Monday, October 28th, the market dropped 13%. And then came Tuesday, Black Tuesday, October 29th, 1929. 16 million shares traded that day, the most ever. But everyone was selling and no one was buying. Fortunes evaporated in hours. Men who woke up millionaires went to bed broke. The stock market lost $14 billion in value in a single day. That's about $200 billion in today's money. But it's not really about the numbers. It's about what happened next. Cut to footage of empty factories, soup lines, families evicted from homes. Within a year, 9,000 banks failed. 9,000. When your bank failed, your savings disappeared. No insurance, no bailout, just gone. Unemployment hit 25%. 1 in 4 Americans couldn't find work. Families lost their homes. People lived in shanty towns made of scrap metal and cardboard, bitterly nicknamed Hoovervilles after President Herbert Hoover. This wasn't just a market crash. It was a national trauma. The entire architecture of American life had collapsed. September 15th, 2008. Lehman Brothers, one of the oldest, most respected investment banks on Wall Street, files for bankruptcy. Unlike Black Tuesday's chaos, this collapse happened in the digital age. No shouting traders on floor, just numbers on screens turning red. But the panic was just as real. The credit markets froze. Banks stopped lending to each other. They didn't know who was holding toxic assets, so they didn't trust anyone. Companies couldn't make payroll. The entire global financial system was seizing up. For most Americans, it started slowly. Your 401k statement arrived, and half your retirement savings were gone. Your home was suddenly worth less than your mortgage. Then the layoffs began. By the end of 2008, the stock market had lost $7 trillion in value. Home prices dropped 30%. Unemployment would eventually hit 10%. And over the next few years, 8 million Americans would lose their homes to foreclosure. Here's what most people don't realize. 2008 wasn't just a Wall Street problem that hurt Main Street. It was a Main Street problem that Wall Street had created, packaged, and sold back to the world. When millions of homeowners couldn't pay their mortgages, those mortgage-backed securities became worthless. Banks that owned them faced collapse. When banks collapsed, they couldn't lend. When they couldn't lend, businesses couldn't operate. When businesses failed, people lost jobs. When people lost jobs, they couldn't pay mortgages. It was a death spiral, and it was accelerating. The question became, would the government let it burn, or would they intervene? March 4th, 1933. Franklin Delano Roosevelt is sworn in as president. The country is on its knees. Banks are failing daily. 1/4 of Americans can't find work. People are hungry, they're angry, and they're losing faith in democracy itself. Bold words, but Roosevelt knew words weren't enough. He needed action, fast. His first act? He declared a bank holiday, a fancy term for shutting down every bank in America for 4 days. It sounds crazy, but it worked. It stopped the panic. It gave the government time to figure out which banks were solid and which were toast. And rebuild he did. Roosevelt launched the New Deal, an explosion of federal programs that would reshape America. The Civilian Conservation Corps put young men to work building roads, planting forests, constructing dams. The Works Progress Administration built schools, bridges, airports, and employed artists, writers, musicians. The Tennessee Valley Authority brought electricity to rural areas for the first time. But the most important changes? The rules. In 1933, Roosevelt signed the Glass-Steagall Act. It separated commercial banking from investment banking. Translation: the bank where you keep your savings couldn't gamble with your money on Wall Street. They had to choose. He created the FDIC, Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation. Now, if your bank failed, the government would protect your savings up to a certain amount. Bank runs? Over. He established the SEC, Securities and Exchange Commission, to police Wall Street and stop the kind of fraud and manipulation that led to the crash. And later, he created Social Security, a safety net so that elderly Americans wouldn't die in poverty. But not everyone loved it. Business leaders called Roosevelt a socialist, a dictator. They said he was destroying capitalism. Roosevelt's response? Basically, I'm saving capitalism from itself. And he was right. The New Deal didn't end the Great Depression. World War II did that. But it stopped the country from collapsing completely. It gave people hope. It gave them work. It gave them a reason to believe in the system again. September 2008. Treasury Secretary Henry Paulson, a former Goldman Sachs CEO, walks into a room with congressional leaders. He tells them, "We need $700 billion immediately, or the entire financial system collapses." The result was TARP, Troubled Asset Relief Program. $700 billion to bail out banks, insurance companies, and auto manufacturers. Unlike the New Deal, this wasn't about putting people to work or building infrastructure. This was about saving the institutions that caused the crisis. Americans were furious. The banks that gambled with their mortgages, that destroyed their savings, that caused millions to lose their jobs, those banks were getting rescued. But the argument from Washington was simple. These banks were too big to fail. If they went down, they'd take everyone with them. The Federal Reserve, led by Ben Bernanke, went even further. They launched quantitative easing, basically creating trillions of dollars out of thin air and using it to buy assets and pump money into the financial system. It worked in a sense. The banks stabilized. The stock market recovered, eventually hitting record highs. The economy started growing again. But there's a catch. That money didn't flow evenly. It went to Wall Street first. Stock prices soared. Real estate in major cities skyrocketed. If you owned assets, stocks, property, businesses, you did great. But if you were a regular worker, wages barely budged. Jobs came back, but they were often lower paying, less secure. The wealth gap, which had been narrowing since the Great Depression, suddenly reversed. The rich got richer, faster than ever before. The middle class stagnated, and a lot of people felt like they'd been sold out. FDR responded to the Great Depression by regulating Wall Street and investing in people. The 2008 response? Rescue Wall Street first, and hope the benefits eventually trickled down. Spoiler, they didn't trickle very far. The New Deal's programs, the infrastructure, the regulations, the safety nets, became the foundation of what people started calling the American dream. In the decades after the Depression, something remarkable happened. The middle class exploded. Union jobs paid well. You could support a family on a single income. You could buy a house, send your kids to college, retire with dignity. The Great Depression taught America a lesson. Unchecked capitalism destroys itself. You need rules. You need oversight. You need a government that's willing to step in when markets fail. And for about 50 years, that lesson held. But memories fade. By the 1980s, a new philosophy took over. Regulation was the enemy of growth. Government was the problem, not the solution. And those Depression-era rules? They were outdated relics. In 1999, President Clinton signed a bill repealing Glass-Steagall, the law that separated regular banking from risky investment banking. The argument was that American banks needed to compete globally. But it meant that your savings bank could now gamble with your money. The very thing that FDR had forbidden was now legal again. And when 2008 hit, the aftermath was different. Sure, the economy recovered. Unemployment went down. The stock market roared back. By 2020, the market had tripled from its 2008 lows. But underneath, something had broken. Jobs came back, but they were different. More contract work, more gig economy, fewer benefits, less security. The phrase side hustle became normal because one job wasn't enough anymore. Meanwhile, Wall Street bounced back stronger than ever. Bank profits soared. Executive bonuses reached record levels. And most of the banks that caused the crisis, they got bigger. Remember too big to fail? Well, they're bigger now. The wealth gap exploded. In 1980, the top 1% owned about 10% of America's wealth. By 2020, they owned over 30%. Homeownership rates for young people plummeted. Student debt skyrocketed. Healthcare costs spiraled. And a generation of Americans began to wonder, is the system broken, or is it working exactly as designed? Just not for us? Political polarization intensified. Movements like Occupy Wall Street and the Tea Party, opposite ends of the spectrum, but both furious about the bailouts, gained traction. Terms like the 1% and economic anxiety entered everyday language. After 1929, America rebuilt with a sense of shared purpose. After 2008, America fractured. Two crashes, two different Americas emerged. So here's the uncomfortable truth. These crashes weren't anomalies. They weren't bad luck or unforeseeable accidents. They were predictable because they follow a pattern, and that pattern is human nature itself. It goes like this. First, there's innovation, something new and exciting. In the 1920s, it was electrification, automobiles, radio. In the 2000s, it was the internet, globalization, financial engineering. Innovation creates opportunity, and opportunity creates wealth. But then greed enters the picture. Not the cartoon villain kind of greed, just normal human desire. People see their neighbors getting rich and think, why not me? Success breeds overconfidence. Prices keep rising, so people believe they'll rise forever. Risk seems to disappear. It's different this time, they say. Every generation says it. Then comes leverage, debt. People borrow money to amplify their bets. In the 1920s, it was margin loans. In the 2000s, it was subprime mortgages and derivatives. Leverage multiplies gains on the way up, but it also multiplies losses on the way down. And eventually, something breaks. A crack appears. Maybe it's small, a few banks fail, a few stocks drop. But in a leveraged system, small problems cascade into catastrophes. Fear spreads faster than greed ever did. Everyone tries to sell at once. There are no buyers. Prices collapse. And suddenly, the debt that seemed manageable becomes impossible. Slowly, the economy recovers. People get back to work. Markets stabilize. Confidence returns. But here's the trap. As things get better, memories fade. The regulations that seemed essential after the crisis start to feel like burdens. They're stifling innovation. People say, we don't need all these rules anymore. So the rules get loosened. Slowly at first, then faster. Let the market work, they say. Trust the private sector. And the cycle begins again. Both crashes revealed the same fundamental flaw. Markets are not self-correcting, at least not without enormous human cost. Left unchecked, they reward short-term thinking, punish prudence, and concentrate risk until the system breaks. In 1929, Americans learned this lesson and built a system to prevent it. In 2008, we learned it again, but this time we didn't build. We patched, we stabilized, and then we moved on. The question is, what happens next time? Because there will be a next time. Here's what we know. In 1929, a stock market crash triggered the worst economic catastrophe in American history. It took a world war and massive government intervention to recover. In 2008, a housing market collapse triggered the worst financial crisis since that depression. It took trillions in bailouts and emergency measures to prevent total collapse. Different triggers, different responses, but the same underlying pattern. So what do we learn? After 1929, America built social safety nets, strong regulations, a middle class, a sense that we're all in this together. After 2008, we saved the banks but not the people. We restored the stock market but not trust. We recovered economically but fractured socially. Here's the uncomfortable truth. Both crashes were preventable. Not inevitable acts of God, but the predictable results of human behavior, greed, overconfidence, and the belief that this time is different. In both cases, there were warnings. Economists sounding alarms. Regulators raising red flags. But in both cases, the warnings were ignored. Because when everyone's making money, nobody wants to hear that the party's about to end. So here we are in 2025. The economy is complicated. Markets are at highs, but so is inequality. Employment is strong, but so is economic anxiety. Housing is expensive. Education is expensive. Healthcare is expensive. And trust in institutions is at historic lows. Are we headed for another crash? Maybe, maybe not. But we know the pattern now. The question isn't whether the cycle will continue. It's whether we'll do anything different. Both crashes revealed something essential about America. We're resilient. We survive. We adapt. But we also forget. After the Depression, we built a system that worked for millions. But we got complacent. We dismantled the protections. And in 2008, we paid the price. Now we've had another chance to rebuild, and we've kind of squandered it. The crashes of 1929 and 2008 weren't just economic events. They were moral tests, tests of who we are, what we value, and who we're willing to protect when things fall apart. In 1929, we eventually chose to protect everyone. We built a floor beneath which no American should fall. In 2008, we chose to protect the system first and hoped that would be enough for everyone else. So what actually caused these crashes? Greed, yes. Overconfidence, absolutely. But also amnesia, the belief that we'd figured it all out, that the old rules didn't apply. And why did America survive both? Not because of the crashes themselves, but because of what we did afterward. The New Deal, the regulations, the safety nets. Those weren't just economic policies. They were a promise that we're in this together. The question for our generation is, do we still believe in that promise? The crashes of 1929 and 2008 weren't just about money. They were about trust. Trust that if you work hard, you'll be okay. Trust that the system is fair. Trust that when things go wrong, we'll face them together. We lost that trust in 1929. We rebuilt it slowly, painfully over decades. We lost it again in 2008, and we haven't really rebuilt it this time. Those consequences are everywhere. In our politics, in our culture, in the way we talk to each other. The crashes didn't just damage balance sheets. They damaged the social fabric. But here's the thing about patterns. Once you see them, you can choose to break them. Breaking the cycle doesn't require genius. It requires memory and courage. The courage to regulate when times are good. The courage to say enough when everyone's getting rich. The courage to remember that markets serve people, not the other way around. Maybe they will. Maybe the next generation will remember what we forgot. Maybe they'll build better guardrails, stronger safety nets, a fairer system, or maybe they'll repeat our mistakes. Maybe they'll believe that this time really is different. Maybe they'll learn the hard way, just like we did. In 1929, the crash destroyed the old America and forced us to build something new, something better in many ways. A middle class, social security, worker protections, the idea that government has a responsibility to its people, not just its markets. In 2008, we had another chance, a chance to rebuild, to reimagine, to create a system that works for everyone, not just the wealthy. We didn't take it. Not really. But it's not too late. It's never too late, because the pattern only repeats if we let it. And every generation gets to choose. Two crashes, 8 decades apart, both revealed the same truth, that unfettered capitalism contains the seeds of its own destruction, that without rules, without oversight, without some sense of collective responsibility, the system eats itself. But both crashes also revealed something else, that we're capable of coming together, of building something better, of learning from our mistakes. The question is, will we? 1929 taught us that capitalism needs a conscience, that markets left to themselves will concentrate wealth and power until they collapse under their own weight. 2008 reminded us of that lesson, reminded us that we'd forgotten, that we dismantled the protections our grandparents built, and that forgetting is dangerous. So what now? Now we live with the consequences of both crashes. The regulations from one, the inequality from the other, the memory of pain and the fear of it happening again. Now we decide what kind of country we want to be. Do we want to be a place where everyone has a shot, or where the rich get bailouts and everyone else gets thoughts and prayers? Do we want to learn from 1929's response, bold, ambitious, transformative, or repeat 2008's half measures? The crashes of 1929 and 2008 are inheritance. They're warnings. They're lessons written in the suffering of millions of people who lost their savings, their homes, their dignity, their hope. Those lessons are simple. Greed without guardrails leads to catastrophe. Markets without regulation destroy themselves. Wealth without responsibility becomes theft. And a society that only rescues the powerful is not really a society at all. But there's another lesson, too, a more hopeful one. We survived. Both times, against incredible odds, America survived. Not because of some inherent superiority, but because enough people decided that giving up wasn't an option. After 1929, people built the New Deal with their own hands. They constructed dams and schools and bridges. They created art and music and theater. They took care of each other. After 2008, people did the same, even without government help. They formed support groups. They shared resources. They refused to let their neighbors fall through the cracks. So maybe the real lesson of both crashes isn't about economics at all. Maybe it's about us, about who we are when everything falls apart. Are we the people who say, "I got mine," and walk away? Or are we the people who say, "We're in this together," and mean it? The crashes of 1929 and 2008 shaped America in profound ways. They revealed our weaknesses, our greed, our short memory, our willingness to sacrifice the many for the few. But they also revealed our strengths, our resilience, our capacity for reinvention, our ability to come together when it really matters. We don't know when the next crash will come. Maybe tomorrow, maybe in 50 years, but it will come. Because as long as we have markets, we'll have cycles. As long as we have people, we'll have greed and fear. The pattern doesn't end, but we can change how we respond to it. Two crashes, 8 decades apart, different technologies, different politics, different music playing in the background, but the same story, the same pattern, the same choice. In the end, these crashes teach us something very simple, that an economy is not just numbers on a screen. It's people's lives, their dreams, their dignity. And when we forget that, when we treat markets as if they're separate from humanity, as if profit is the only thing that matters, we set ourselves up for catastrophe. But when we remember, when we build systems that protect people, not just profits, when we learn from the past instead of repeating it, that's when we create something worth having, something worth protecting. The pattern is clear. The lessons are written. The question now is, what will we do with them? Will we remember? Will we act? Will we build something better? Or will we wait for the next crash and wonder, once again, how we didn't see it coming? The crashes of 1929 and 2008 shaped America, but they don't have to define it. The future is still unwritten. Two crashes, same story, different endings. The next ending? That's up to us.